Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, September 16th, 2019. I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria, and I wanted to start by thanking those of you who have made Talk Nerdy possible this week and every week, because remember, Talk Nerdy will always be 100% free to download, and that's because of the support from listeners just like Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, welcome back, Dudas Infinitas, Phil T. Bear, the Zombie Drummer, David J.E. Smith, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. Thank you guys so very much. And thank you to all of the other Patreons who have visited Patrons who have visited patreon.com/talknerdy and pledged your support. I have one other piece of news that I want to talk about before we dive into the show this week. And I'm actually really mad at myself that I haven't brought this up yet at the top of the show. But do you guys remember SciComm Camp? Now that's SciComm as in science communication, SCICOMM camp. If you go to scicommcamp.com, you can learn all about it. Now this year's SciComm Camp is going to be from November 8th through 10th in Los Angeles. It's actually in the beautiful Simi Hills at a wonderful camp style kind of sleepaway resort. And I know this sounds like it's for kids, but no, SciComm Camp is for adults. It's for early, mid, and late career science communicators. So if you are a listener to the show and you've always wanted to learn more about your science communication efforts, learn how to improve them, whether you're podcasting, whether you have a blog, whether you are involved in your local museum or you do kind of science communication events out in your local communities, you want to get into television, I don't know, I'm sure I'm forgetting things. You give talks. These, the different workshops and breakaway sessions at SciComm Camp are really, really, really informative. And on top of that, a lot of SciComm Camp campers, I guess that's what you'd call them, they tell us that just as much as what they've learned at SciComm Camp, just as effective is the experience, because they go away having a whole new community of friends and colleagues that they can lean on, who support them, that they can support, and that they can learn from. So, guys, I can't recommend SciComm Camp enough. Also, I can't guarantee that SciComm Camp is going to keep going every year. It's a big effort. It's a lot of work. We rely on a lot of corporate sponsorships. Oh, by the way, if you want to support SciComm Camp, we really could use your help. So you can get in touch with us through the website, scicommcamp.com, and let us know that you're interested in supporting. There's a lot of different things that we can offer you in exchange. So just reach out and let us know. But if you want to attend SciComm Camp, spots are filling up. So please visit scicommcamp.com so that you can learn a little bit more about the experience and see if it's right for you. This year's keynote speaker is Allie Ward. She's the host of the Ologies podcast. She also is involved in a bunch of different television shows. She's super awesome. Henry Ford's Innovation Nation. Did I mention Invention with Allie Ward? Lots of great stuff. So I know you're going to love it. Check it out at scicommcamp.com. Okay, let's talk about this week's show. I'm super excited because I have a chat with Craig Childs. Now, he's the author of Atlas of a Lost World, Travels in Ice Age America. So we talk quite a bit about the book, as well as about his fascinating background. So, he has degrees in journalism and desert studies. He teaches writing at the University of Alaska in Anchorage and the Mountain View MFA program at Southern New Hampshire University, and lives in Colorado. But he is an expert in ancient migration routes on foot. And so he himself is an adventurer. He goes out and learns a lot about early migration and kind of early ways of life in the Americas, and has so many brilliant insights about his own experiences. It's a ton of fun. I learned an awful lot. So guys, without any further ado, here he is, Craig Childs. Well, Craig, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm excited to talk about your new book, Atlas of a Lost World, Travels in Ice Age America. So I have to ask, what inspired you to put this book together? It's actually now in paperback, so it's new, but not as new as it was when it was just in hardcover.
Well, it's like 40,000 years old, so I think it's got some time. I Well, it came in a lot of different ways. The idea started maybe 25 years ago. I was working on an excavation in southern Colorado of a Pleistocene cave. There was It was going back about 300,000 years, and we were deep down in this cave uh, every day for probably 3 seasons, and you'd be down in the pit, complete darkness, digging through bones, mostly tiny bones, even though it was in a time of pretty extraordinary megafauna. I was working mostly with pack rats and mice, uh, but just seeing these layers of time and these where you could actually look at the trench you're digging, look at the stratigraphy, and be watching climates moving, and thinking, well, this really wasn't that long ago. And I was actually I was the cook at the base camp, and I'd come out of the cave every day to go back to get dinner together at our camp, and I'd be jumping from the ice age back out into what's happening right now, and just thinking, wow, this really is a time machine. There isn't that much difference. It's one step from the cave, climbing out of it into the daylight, and I started putting myself back in the ice age, and I thought was thinking about writing the book then, and my idea at the time was, I'm going to come back and sit in this cave for months, at the mouth of this cave through an entire winter, and just reimagine the ice age, and that evolved into something much more interesting over the decades. But I think that's where it started for me.
And of course, in some ways, it started even earlier in terms of your interest in these topics and understanding early humankind here on, at least on our continent. I'm reading about your background, and it's just fascinating. So you're an adventurer, but also a journalist, and have been doing that for a very long time. But um, you studied women's studies and desert studies. There's a degree. You got a master's in desert studies. That's a thing.
Yeah.
What does that entail?
Well, it's a thing that for that master's degree, I spent about a year and a half in the field in American deserts, mostly the Sonoran Desert and the Colorado Plateau, the Great Basin Desert, looking at flash floods, the limnology of water holes, just freshwater pockets formed by rain, looking at how water and the desert work together. So I spent a part of that degree down on the Mexican border with Arizona, mapping water holes. So it was a long crash course in survival and in water in the deserts. And I think desert studies is finally what got created out of it. I'm probably the only person who has a master's in desert studies, and I've spent my life exploring deserts, writing about deserts. Born in the desert, so that's my world, and I think you're always thinking about time when you're out there, when you're looking at rock formations. You're seeing the scale from the top of the Grand Canyon to the bottom, going back 2 billion years. So you're always essentially in a time machine when geology is exposed like that, and the more immediate time machine of right now. You got to find water. If you don't find water in the next 3 days, something dire will happen. So I feel like I'm always bouncing around between geologic time and the current time, which makes looking at the ice age pretty easy.
So, journalism, women's studies, desert studies, you're an adventurer and you write about these adventures, but you also, I mean, you mentioned a lot about time and kind of your relationship with time, both geologic time, but also kind of human time scales.
it seems like you have to wear the hats of like an anthropologist, a geologist, a lot of different types of scientists to maintain the perspective that you do in your travels and then also in your writings.
I think that's probably necessary for anybody who's writing about this sort of stuff, because you don't want to just take one angle on it. And what I'm trying to do is look at all the different facets of whatever subject I'm working on at the time, which can easily range from looking at a geologic perspective, putting things into a context of much deeper time, to how have things changed for us since the Ice Age. What does a 21st century person carry with them in similar landscapes that somebody would have traveled through 15 or 20,000 years ago? So I guess I'm looking for whatever tool will access a good vantage on the subject, and if that means jumping from science to science, philosophy to philosophy, whatever it is, uh, that's what I need to be doing. That's what I need to learn.
Yeah, when we talk about this kind of this era that you write about in your book, the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, we think of mammoths and we think of caves and we think of early humans, but we don't really know exactly what that means. Can you maybe help orient us to when this was and kind of what the population looked like at that time?
Well, I'm looking at the Americas, mostly North America, from let's just say 27,000 years ago, to the close of the Ice Age, around 10,000 years ago. And this is when it really happened for the Americas, human wise. There may have been earlier appearances. There's a scattering little evidence here and there that there were people showing up earlier than a lot of archaeologists think. But really, when humans entered this side of the world and started leaving a lot of sign, that's ranging from 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, when you're basically coming to the end of the Pleistocene, the end of the Ice Age. So you've had these radical ups and downs of climate. I mean, ice ages are notoriously unstable. Uh, a lot of major changes going on, and as humans were arriving and really settling into place, I'd say from 15 to 13,000 years ago, the Ice Age was coming off its plane, and things were warming significantly. There were times in there that it was as warm or nearly as warm as it is now. So you had massive glacier melt. You had big floods happening, climate change. In some places, that was very beneficial. In some places, you had incredible sea level rises happening. So it was ice ages are. I'm not sure if I want to live in an ice age. I would go look at it, because it seems like everything is changing. It's just not as stable as these interglacial periods like we're in now, which I don't know if you want to call this stable or not, but for the last 10,000 years, it's been relatively calm around here.
Okay. So the climate is kind of out of control. These are the earliest settlers, I guess you could call them, or travelers to North America. So are these individuals that came across the Bering Strait and kind of traveled all the way across northern Europe from Asia? Is that what anthropologists believe?
That's a good question, because the story has been changing, of course. I think originally we had this notion of people crossing the Bering Land Bridge, because sea levels are down, and this connection between Asia and North America is out in open daylight, and so we've had this story of crossing the land bridge and entering North America, and it's simple and makes sense, except no human story is really simple. And I think in many ways, no human story makes a lot of sense. I, it was more that people were coming from multiple directions, from different points at different times. It seems like the more likely arrival was not across the land bridge proper, or at least the more likely big early arrival, but it was coming along the coastline, travel by boat. Basically, when you have sea levels down that far, you have land bridges open all over the place, and there was one continuous coastline from Sumatra to Kamchatka, across the coast, the southern coast of the Bering Land Bridge, and then all the way down the west coast of the Americas to southern Chile. So this is a long, continuous coastline, and it's biotically rich. There are kelp forests all the way up into Alaska. So this would have made sense. It's still a bit of a hypothesis because most of where people would have been is underwater and no boats have been found, although there's plenty of evidence from the east coast of Asia that people were traveling by boat back to 30 or 35,000 years ago. So it's just making sense. Where the first people start appearing looks very coastal, that people are showing up from British Columbia down to California, down to the coast of Patagonia and Chile, and moving inland following rivers.
Interesting. So, what do we know culturally about people in this era? I mean, there was obviously society. There's been society as long as there's been more than a handful of people together. But are these hunter-gatherer types? What did they eat? Did they have language? Did they have pottery? Like, obviously, but like, what kinds of tools do we know that they were using? And I don't know. I shouldn't say obviously. I know very little about this era, I think.
Yeah, it's in the Americas, it's hard to know very much about this era because, where you go to Eurasia, you go to Africa, people have been there for a long, long time. But these are the first inklings of people, so there's not a lot left behind. There's not a lot to say culture, although you can. That's one thing I tried to get into in this book is though there's not a lot on the ground, you can look back to where people came from and say, okay, there were cultural traditions that were well established, that languages were solid, that this wasn't the grunting monosyllabic caveman kind of picture. These are people coming across probably with different languages, different ethnic groups. I mean, not that I think only 3 human skeletons from 13,000 years ago and before have been found in the Americas. So there isn't a lot to go on genetically. Um, you don't see much ornamentation because you don't see much of anything.
Yeah, yeah. So it's hard to make an assumption of absence of anything simply because there's absence of evidence.
Yeah, and I say these were humans. They came with language, they came with culture, they came with everything. But it was so long ago, and there were so few of them that you don't find much evidence. I mean, eventually you find Clovis, so you find this fluorescence around 13,000 years ago of very specific weaponry type. So you can see this. One of the peaks of stone weaponry in the world was happening 13,000 years ago in the Americas. And you can see the trade routes, or you can see where they were picking up the original source stones and then carrying them for, on average, 300 to 500 miles to where they were found. So you can say, oh, these are mobile people. And looking at what they were eating, coastal travelers seem to be, rather than hunter gatherers, they'd be more referred to as foragers because they're basically taking everything that they can. You're seeing sites where they're eating mastodon and salmon and seaweed and there's plenty of evidence of hunting of megafauna, but more likely they're eating rabbits and squirrel, and what people would actually be eating. But there's ample evidence that they are killing mammoths, or at least butchering mammoths. They're butchering giant ground sloths. So they're engaging with pretty much everything in their environment.
Do we have any estimation at all of like how many people there were? Because I would assume that these are very sparse settlements or kind of nomadic settlements, like that there are just not that many people at all early on.
Yeah, I've asked this question a lot. In fact, I wrote some years ago about pre-Columbian migrations in the Southwest, so back 1,000 years ago, and population estimates were really hard for that. And these are people cliff dwellings and pueblos, and so when you're going back to the Ice Age, it's really hard to tell. Even by 13,000 years ago, when it looks like humans were fairly well established, rarely do you find a site that was occupied more than once. So there's a fire pit, they had a fire, they cooked, and they moved on. So it's population is hard to see, but then at the same time, if you're looking back at Clovis 13,000 years ago, you can see that people are exchanging, that ideas are moving, that certain technologies are moving like wildfire. The Clovis point basically went coast to coast from Maine to California within 200 years. And to me, that says, okay, people are well established and they have routes and they're encountering each other and they're encountering each other across the entire continent, which to me means even if the population is small, these people know each other and they're mobile and there are enough of them that they're not just these isolated islands. They are interconnected. So I think that the more we learn about what happened early in human occupation of North America, the more we're going to see maybe not population centers, but strong populations. There were enough people to be communicating across large distances.
Interesting. You've mentioned Clovis culture a few times and these Clovis points. Maybe you can help us understand a little bit better what you're referring to there. I know it has to do with the tools that were being used at the time. What else kind of defines what is Clovis culture?
Clovis is a really hard thing to pin down, and it's really the first exciting that happens where you say, "Oh, there's something happening here that's clearly identifiable." That there are multiple technologies that are found in North America or in the Americas in general around that time, around 13,000 years ago. Um, there are stemmed point users who appear to have come from the West Coast, and there's this fluorescence of Clovis points, which is a really specific technology. And in fact, a lot of archaeologists are shying away from calling it a culture and just calling it a technology because it's hard to see what they were doing other than making these points. But because the points are so similar across such large distances, there is some kind of ideology underneath it. But what that is, hard to tell. But what it appears to be is big game hunting. While most people are probably, like I said, eating squirrels and rabbits and deer and elk, there seem to be these moments of people getting together and using highly specialized weaponry that's often found around butchering sites of megafauna, all sorts of megafauna from elephant-like gomphotheres in northern Mexico to Columbian mammoths all across the southern part of North America. Uh, these people are killing and I assume based on the butchering evidence, eating large animals. And different archaeologists have very different stories for who these people were, whether they were all one group that was connected or it was just a technology that people were picking up and saying, "Hey, this really means something." But when you sit down with people who work with the stone, I spent 4 days with a flint knapper who specialized in making Clovis points, who studied the original points and then would take the chert and sit there and work it down with the original tools, with antler and bone and stone. And and he hunts with his own tools. And I said, well, do you hunt with Clovis points? And he said, no, they're just way too specialized. They're more made to look like something than to actually be something. They're not good hunting tools.
Weird. Huh.
His take on it, and a lot of archaeologists that I talked to about this, their take on it was that these were actually for show. They were used, they were hunted with. There's plenty of evidence that they were, refashioned and repaired, and there's a lot of you can find the hemoglobin from certain animals, from horses, from bison, mammoths on them. So they were used. But to talk to an actual hunter who says, these were meant to convey a message more than they were meant for good, that to me suggests that something curious was happening 13,000 years ago. What it was, it could have been so many things. What I wouldn't give to get a glimpse and go, oh, I see. These are like what I've compared it to is the whale hunters, indigenous whale hunters in the north, where they're not living off of whale. Whale is a ceremonial killing where they have specialized tools for this thing that happens once a year or once every 10 years, and then the stories are told about it for the next 100 years. But you wouldn't say, oh, these are the whale killing people. No, they live off of seals and salmon, but they get together for these extraordinary hunts that define their stories, that are part of their culture. And that's what I think Clovis probably was.
That's fascinating. It almost makes me think of how there are, even modern hunters who have their weapons of choice, and some of them are really adorned, and some of them are more like jewelry or more like prized possessions than actually, they may have a gun that's beautiful. They're like, oh, it's not actually my best gun for shooting, but it's my best gun to look at. You know what I mean? So it is interesting that the outward appearance we've developed culturally as human beings, adornment has probably followed suit with, form and function. Like we think of everything as having to have been functional, but obviously, even probably early humans were concerned with aesthetics.
Oh yeah, how much of we do is really functional? I mean, there's so much we do that is for show. Is to say, hey, this is where I come from. These are my people. These are or this is the gun that I spent a lot of money on. I know that from hunters that I go out with, where if they're just hunting for themselves, they take a certain weapon. But if they're out with buddies, they take the good one.
Yeah. 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 And there's, the beautiful rifles that have like hand carved, pieces, and I mean things that do not matter for killing an animal, but obviously are of concern. So yeah, it's really fascinating that even these early American humans probably were somewhat mindful of display and show and sending a message and clanship and all of these things. So I'm still trying to paint a picture in my mind of who these people were, what was around them at the time, this megafauna, what kinds of things they were eating. You said that they were more like foragers. So was there any evidence of anything agricultural yet at this point?
No. And then that's not to say that it's not there, because I think agriculture comes on so slowly, where it's people carrying seeds, that aren't necessarily cultigens, but just seeds that they've gathered, and then they throw them in a place where they think, okay, well, in 5 years we'll come back here, and maybe the plant that we're after, a certain kind of grass, will have thrived here. There's plenty of evidence of people eating the same seeds 14,000 years ago that they were eating 700 years ago in the same place. So, there could be forms of early agriculture, but, that doesn't really get serious until, at least in the Southwest where I'm from, you start seeing corn and agave that are being cultivated. So I think that they're still foragers, although they may be throwing seeds down here and there.
You talked about the continuous coastline. You talked about people coming by ocean. I mean, that means that they had to have boats that were sophisticated enough to get them there, yes?
Yeah. Yeah. And the issue there is no boats have survived this long. And And when I talk to boat archaeologists, especially in the Northwest and in Alaska, where they're looking at really closely at these questions, they're saying you're just not going to find one because it's wood and skin, and maybe something will show up in it someday, but so far nothing has shown up. But looking at the distribution pattern, how people arrive, the coast has to be involved, and what kind of boats they were using. They're probably the same boats that indigenous people in the whole Arctic region have been using for, well, since the Ice Age, which is uh, the umiak, which is a skin boat. You can put about 10 people in it. It's a wood frame skin boat. I spent some time on St. Lawrence Island off the coast of Siberia for this book, and there were a number of umiat still up on blocks, and I spent a bit of time talking to people about these boats and how they work and how the traditions are carried on, and this makes sense for how you would move on the water. That these things are seaworthy. You could cross from Japan to the coast of Washington using one of these things. If they had boats for 15,000 years, they figured it out.
Incredible. I mean, I don't know why, but I think that it's hard for us, even geologic time is hard enough, but even human time, time scales, I feel like as a species, maybe it has to do with our evolutionary, like our neuroevolutionary past, but it's really hard for us to look at a period in time and think about all of the things that would need to come together and coalesce in that snapshot. So I think of boats as being much more sophisticated than stone points, but perhaps, well, obviously, I'm quite off in those thoughts. Like boats would have had to have existed at the same time or even predated the ability to hunt with like a spear, for example.
I think when you look at human evolution, one thing to consider here is that these Ice Age people were basically indistinguishable from us. The only thing that's really notable is that their brain cases were about 5% larger, which played around with that idea and said, well, does that mean they were smarter? They had bigger brains, or does that mean they had more larger aggression centers in their brains? But basically, they were us. If you dropped somebody from the Ice Age into this world and give them a haircut and clothes and other than I think the terrified look on their face from what we've done, I think they'd just blend right in.
So what you're saying is that Encino Man was like an accurate portrayal of what somebody would be like.
You just throw somebody in and they will Southern California, that's how it would have worked. But they were us.
Yeah.
I think they had this same level of needing to display culture they had the same capacity for emotion and reason as any of us. And, I really think that if you put any of us in this situation, you said, okay, here you are on a coast, build a boat. We'd figure it out and then give us a few more generations and we'd have that down pat. And so if you take this question back to the Ice Age, yeah, they're living in these places for thousands of years. They're figuring out the technologies they need. They're figuring out how to take walrus hide and put it on the outside of a wood frame, and boom, you've got a boat. And if you've got a boat, you can get anywhere and you can live off of resources that you don't have on the mainland. These things really would change your reality. And that's what humans do so well, is change our reality. So I think they were doing, in some ways, I think they were better, far better at any of this than we are now. That maybe their brains were bigger because they had to answer more questions more rapidly, that they weren't sitting in front of a keyboard and getting absorbed in these weird worlds that aren't real in the way that the tactile world would have been real for us in the past.
All right, guys, let's get back to the show.
I mean, that brings me to, a more personal question, which is that when you set out to experience as close as you can to the kind of original experiences of our ancestors firsthand, obviously this must be a really transformative um, experience for you psychologically, and you really do such a beautiful job of kind of bringing the adventure and honestly like the suspense and the intensity into your writing. But I would love to know kind of personally what kind of deep effects it has on you spending that kind of time, and whether you experience, as I often do when I spend time in Africa or in other countries, like reentry depression when you come back home.
Yeah. I guess one of my takes on this is that, part in some way we've changed so much since then. When I spend a lot of time in the field for anything, for studying the Ice Age or following animals, whatever it is, I realize how much we've lost. And, you can get it back. You can walk back out there and figure it out and re-engage your senses. But when I'm out there, I realize what a dynamic, satisfying world it is to not be trapped in the modern human construct. Because I think we lived in that world, in the the landscape of rain and snow and rock and deer and all of that for most of our evolution. And what we're living in now is just this nanosecond, really, where suddenly we're having to wear these clothes and drive these vehicles and negotiate the internet. And so much of that is brand new. And as a species, we're really good at this. But to go back to an old way of living, and it's not that I really went back to an old way for this book. I mean, I still carried 21st century gear with me. I still used my stove, my steel knife, all of that. But to be in the landscape that they were in, yeah, it's a shock coming back. I come back and say, wait, were we supposed to be doing this? Like, yeah, we were supposed to evolve and change. I mean, that's what we do as a species. But there is a comfort and familiarity to being on the ground, to sleeping there, to being under the stars that I think we're missing. And I think it's a problem. I don't feel right when I'm out of that. And I wonder, for all the people who never get into that, who never have the opportunity to sleep on the ground, to watch seasons pass and not have human lights interrupting the sky. I worry about what we're losing. And, you can get it back. Like I said, you can walk back out there, but most of us don't have that opportunity. And I know that, we'll go wherever we're going to go. We'll evolve into whatever we are. But I don't want to lose this tactile connection to a world that's not human. And that's what I think they lived in, is humans were not the majority. Humans were rare. This continent in particular, this side of the planet, while the other side had humans from the beginning on, this side got humans very late. So this was an experiment. This was a place where humans were rare, and the animals were, in a way, I think the animals were the people. The animals were the dominant life force here, and humans were moving among them. And I don't want to forget that. I want us to be able to remember there is something other than human happening here.
Yeah, and it there's this thing that happens. I've mentioned it on the show a couple of times. For anybody who has spent a fair amount of time in nature, whatever that means, but away from cities, people who live in more rural areas now, but also people who have traveled quite a bit. I'm remembering when I spent some time in the Amazon, in Peru on the Tambopata, feeling like when I first arrived, having heard all these stories about how alive the rainforest was, and getting there and being like, where's the life, and like feeling very much like there's nothing here. And then it took days and days before I started to hear things and see things. And eventually, I learned tricks about using my headlamp to see all the flashes of the spider's eyes and seeing the caiman's eyes glowing red in the river and hearing literally hundreds of different birds. But at first you're not even attuned to it. And so you think about how connected people were to all of the wildlife, plants, animals, teeny tiny things, really, really large things, and how adept they were at understanding kind of their risks, their utilities, but also just things that have nothing to do with the human being, just understanding their place in ecology.
Yeah, and doesn't it feel like when you come back from there and you look at what we're doing and you just go, God, this is lonely.
Yeah, and you also have that thing whenever I come home where I'm like, why do I have so much stuff? I don't need any of this.
Yeah, we've built a different world.
Yeah. Have you seen the cartoon? There's a kind of a famous cartoon that I came across years ago called The Fence, and it shows a series of eras, and it's like we call it a fence. It protects us from out there, and then eventually it's like we call it a fence. It protects them from us, and you see the kind of wild area shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until it's actually fenced in, as opposed to the other way around. And it really does show this kind of human development, which has been so detrimental to the planet.
Yeah, I think that we're getting to that era where we have to hold ourselves in to keep from damaging everything on the outside, and that's becoming this. The places that aren't human are becoming rarer and rarer, and like you experienced in the Amazon, when you get out of that human world, you start seeing what's really going on. You see, the human world is actually this just tiny slice of the pie. But when you're in it, when you're in the city, when you're in the bulk of humanity, you think that's all there is. You forget what's out there. And I guess that's why it feels lonely to me to come back. Is just like, oh, there's only one species operating here. That doesn't make sense. How would that work?
And it's true. It's how we've existed for so long now. This everything is anthropocentric. Everything is how does it improve my life, or how is it making my life more difficult? How can I use it? How can I take advantage of it? Um, Instead of how can I figure out how to do the least amount of damage to it, or how can I exist in a way that respects it? It's just not a viewpoint that we've had for a long time. I mean, I feel like there's a movement that's coming back. It's almost like a trendy thing now, like it's coming back in a positive way, but it's still so small compared to kind of multinational, conglomerates and large corporations, that I really do sometimes struggle with feeling pessimistic about our prospects of the Anthropocene.
I think we're changing, and I think in the world we evolved in, where we were one of the animals, where we were, part of so much more going on. I think then you could have lived like, I think like most things do, just thinking of yourself or thinking of your species, of how can I use this? How can I survive? How can this benefit me? What do I need to avoid? What am I drawn to? Where now maybe what is making us different as a species is we're recognizing that, oh, that doesn't work. It works as if we're in a big system with a lot of other things, but if it's just us, then we're going to devour everything. So maybe for the first time, our species is becoming more aware of this is maybe counterintuitive, more aware of what's around us because we realize what we're impacting. And I guess my hope for our evolution is that we will say, oh, there's actually a world we have to take care of, or we have to be careful how we influence it, because we've become so powerful and so singular, whereas we used to be just one of everything, and now we're the big one. We are the one who, I mean, we've now named this geologic epoch after ourselves to say we have this kind of impact. So maybe it's Pollyannish of me to think that we are going to go in a direction of protecting what is not human. But I think it's there. I think it's within us. It's growing. It's evolving.
Well, and it may be somewhat idealistic, but honestly, it's the only thing we can do. It's going to get to a point where we have to mitigate, because if we don't, there is no future for us. Because, the planet will rebound. I mean, it will have some dark days ahead of it. It'll take a very long time for it to rebound. But if we want to create a safe space for us to exist, we can't keep going at the rate we're going. I mean, we know that. We just can't do it. I have to know, like, when you're out and about on these travels and you're experiencing these adventures firsthand, have you always had a passion for the types of things you have to be able to do, like forage and hunt and build and work with your hands? Or is that something that evolved through your dedication to writing about these topics?
I grew up this way. I grew up exploring. Um, I grew up avoiding humanity. I I think it was intrinsic in my life from the start that I wanted to be out and moving and on the ground, and both my parents were explorers, hunters, fishers, mountain climbers, and so I that was always part of my life, and maybe that's why I see it as such a valuable thing, because it was with me from the start, and I just built a life around pursuing that, because I find so much value there and so much perspective. I mean, I don't know if it makes me a better human in any kind of way, but it satisfies me deeply to be out there, and it always has. It's always been my dream, and it's been the place where I go, where I find the greatest solace. So writing about it, traveling in it, just that's more the byproduct of what I've always sought in my life.
And so, not to get, obviously too personal, because I'm not sure how much you're comfortable talking about on the air, but you have a family yourself, yes? How does this work out with having a nuclear family doing these kinds of travels? Do they get to come with you? Is this a part of their life as well, or is it just something you're constantly having to negotiate?
It's a combination of things. During the I have two kids. They're two boys who are now 12 and 16. Um, One of the chapters in the book, I'm traveling with families, including my own family, on the coast of South Central Alaska by kayak, and writing about here. This is what it's like scouting ahead for a camp, and having large predators in close vicinity, and having kids, and it's an interesting experience, because over the length of this book, my wife and I separated, and so now I have a smaller nuclear family. So it's and I looked at that in the Ice Age terms, and I said, well, this probably happened. This was probably very much part of migration, is that families split and went different directions. But I spend a lot of time with my boys out. I mean, last night we were camped out in the middle of nowhere in western Colorado, watching the moon come up, and seeing the stars, and every summer I like to get them out to see civilization. So we pick a city every summer, but we have to walk to the airport to get there, which is it. It's from 8 to 10 days of pretty serious wilderness. um, navigating canyons, going over a 10,000-foot plateau, and figuring our way ahead. And we've been doing this since my youngest was 9, and so it's not so much that they get to join me, it's that this is just what we do together. This is our lives. We spend good chunks of our time on the ground exploring, looking for routes. And as they get older, thank goodness they can carry more, and I can send them off looking for routes. When I'm in a canyon, I go, I'm not sure if there's a way up there, why don't you guys go check it out? So that's my life with them, is very much the life that I write about.
That's incredible. I love that. And so you think that this is something that will probably, continue on in their lives as well. Like they're not being dragged along. This is something that they really truly enjoy as well.
Yeah, if they hated it, I would go, okay, that's fine. I'll go on my own. Uh, they seem to enjoy it so far, and I've told them, you don't have to do this the rest of your life. If you don't love this, then go find the thing that you love. But since you live with me, this is what we're going to do. And if they objected strongly, I would rethink it. But no, they grew up this way. Um, this is normal behavior for them, as going to a city and figuring out how to navigate subways in New York. That's equally normal, and that's what I wanted to bring to them, is say, well, here are all these different worlds that you will inhabit. You will be sleeping on the ground. You will be looking for water. You will be figuring out routes in really complex terrain that are kind of life and death, and you're going to be on the street. You got to figure out buses, subways. You got to negotiate how to pay for a meal, how to tip. So I'm introducing them into as much of the human world as I can, including the humans in the wilderness world.
I love that. That's so incredible. And I think in many ways rare, at least for a lot of people listening to this podcast who probably live in cities, to have that kind of I don't know, that kind of focus and interest in their lives as a family. I think that's really incredible. It's something that I'm only just recently discovered as an adult, a little bit later in life, how much I love to just spend time in places that don't have as many of the creature comforts that I'm used to, so that I can be a little bit more connected in a way that I just don't feel living in Los Angeles. And I think I camped a bit as a child, and I think I traveled, we did some RV travels and things like that. But I do wish that I had maybe learned some of those skills a little bit more. And I think I had more of a childhood growing up in Texas. Like that than a lot of people that I know now. But it's honestly a gift, I think, to be able to give to your children, because it really does last a lifetime. And those skills are so important. They're so important. And like so few of us have them.
Yeah, and the skills that I'm more afraid they don't have is the skills of being in civilization. Um, I'm trying to make sure that happens. I mean, we backpacked for 8 days across Brooklyn and Manhattan, and just had to navigate and figure that place out. I mean, this summer we walked for 8 days through really serious terrain, stuff that made me nervous, where I was questioning my my parenting, and we popped out the other end. Got on a puddle flight out of Grand Junction, Colorado, and then the next thing we landed at LAX, and then we hit Los Angeles and just said, okay, here's another wilderness. Let's look at this city. Let's move around it and figure out how you navigate, where are we going to sleep, how are we going to work all this out, and we figure it out.
I love that. That's so great. I mean, I think about being in cities and I'm like, you just get an Uber. Like it's so easy. But of course, I've never even thought about navigating a city. Yeah, the way that you would navigate like the wild, the way that you would navigate nature or a rural area, for example.
Well, and that doesn't rule out Uber. We are using tools that you're using. We're showing up and saying, okay, how are people doing this? How do they move around and where are they going? Let's find out.
Oh my gosh, I love it. You're like anthropologists in the big city.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Oh, that's incredible. Oh my gosh, what a fun experience. Like I can imagine an entire travelogue just based on time spent with the family doing these incredible things. And of course, I feel like it's such an honor that we as the readers get to experience, because in many ways your writings really are travelogues. They're just so much more than that, right? Because that's really the send up for you, is that you're on this journey, and then all of these things, whether it be the historical aspects, which is a massive part of it, anthropological, archaeological, genetic, biological, geological, all these things are peppered in to help understand these stories a little bit better. So this is like the meanest question ever, because it's like asking you which one of your children is your favorite children. But is there a story in particular, at least or especially from Atlas of the Lost World, that stands out to you that you'd like to share with the listeners, just to whet their appetite a little bit for the book?
Yeah, sure. I just when you asked that, what came to mind was southern New Mexico in White Sands. I was out with a group of people. Actually, a couple of them were writing students that I had taught at University of Alaska, and they came down to join me on this trip. And I was out. I was looking for mammoth tracks, which have been preserved from about 20,000 years ago on this ancient lake bed where nothing is alive. It is just this barren place with white sand dunes. And we did end up finding, I think, 7 tracks of a walking mammoth. And while we were out there, uh, we're just backpacking around in the sand dunes. And what I'm really doing when I'm out is just wandering aimlessly, enjoying the view, getting up early and watching the sunrise. And one of the members in the group said, "Hey, let's have a hide and seek game, but it'll be a hunt the mammoth game. And Craig, you're the old mammoth." And oh, great! And they said, "How about a 4-minute head start?" And I took off into the sand dunes, and I took this game really seriously. In fact, a lot more seriously than they were taking it, because once they realized that I was like miles away, they went, "Oh no, he's really doing this. Like, we are the mammoth hunters, and he is the mammoth." And they were younger, faster, and it took them a while to catch up with me, because I think they were just enjoying their day when they realized that I was outsmarting them. And very quickly they outsmarted me and closed in on me. And just having this, being out in a dune field where one of the guys with us is a friend of mine who was a bomb diffuser in Iraq, and we had a lot of conversations about weaponry, where I'm talking about Clovis weaponry, and he's talking about what it's like to undo a booby trap in Baghdad in the back of a truck, and so we're talking about weapons, and we're finding pieces and parts from the nearby White Sands missile range, and right over the horizon is where the first nuclear bomb in human history was detonated. So it just felt like all of time was being compressed here, where you're finding mammoth tracks, and you're finding parts of missiles, and you're thinking about Clovis prints or Clovis points, and your friends are hunting you down because you were the last mammoth alive in the sand dune. It's just, I go out there looking for these moments that bring the past forward and the forward past, that bring it all together in one place. And when they finally nailed me, which by the time they caught up to me, they were pissed because they were just game, and God, we've been working this for hours trying to find you, and And I managed to slip away from them when they thought they were going to catch me until I pulled a muscle and I was staggering. And man, when they caught me, they just nailed me to the ground. They just dove on me and we all hit the ground and we're just lying there panting and the last mammoth has died. That was it. And that was, for me, that was a great moment. It hurt, but it was good.
I love that so much. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, Craig, I've kept you for so long now and I haven't asked you the closing two questions that I always ask everybody who comes on the show. And you have this great perspective of, like we mentioned, geologic time, human time scales. And so I'm definitely interested to hear your perspective on these two questions because they're pretty big picture questions. Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
All right. So I want you to think about the future now. We're going to turn from the past and we're going to look forward. And in whatever context is relevant to you right now, whether it be in your work, your life, something maybe bigger than thou, I want you to tell me first, what is the thing that keeps you up the most at night, the thing that you're most worried about, maybe even a little bit pessimistic, borderline cynical about? And on the flip side of that, what are you truly, genuinely excited, optimistic, looking forward to?
Huh. Well, good questions. um, it's kind of, I think my answers to both are two sides of the same coin. Where the thing that really keeps me up is what are we doing to ourselves and everything around us right now? That and especially at this particular moment in these particular years where I see humans just that we're just going against each other, that we have not figured out how to ride this complex wave of huge population growth, of doubling and tripling in lifetimes, of nearly 8 billion people. And I look at that and go, you know what? You would expect this to be hard. You would expect us not to know exactly what to do with so many people at, often at cross purposes. And so I see this time in history as being really difficult. I imagine from some time in the distant future, people looking back at this moment and saying, ooh, that would have been hard. We didn't quite know how to do it yet. And that's what keeps me up is what are we going to destroy in this process of not knowing, of we haven't matured yet and we are increasing in numbers so rapidly that we're going faster than we can think or faster than we can react. And so that's not just for humanity, but for everything around us. What will we destroy in the process of trying to stay alive? And I guess the other side, the hopeful side, is that I think it's well within our grasp to figure this out. How long it will take, I don't know. How much damage will happen, I can't say. But I think we have a lot more on the conservation end, on the protection, on the do the wise thing end of things than we know. Because knowing us as a species and what we're capable of technologically, I look at us now and go, it's amazing we haven't destroyed everything and each other yet. It's amazing that there are still protected places, that we are defending species, that we are defending, that we have libraries, that we have incredible things in our world that require forethought, that require compassion, empathy. And when I see that, I think, oh, this is built into us too. We aren't only consumptive, ravenous destroyers. We are also empathetic protectors. And that is what gives me hope is I think that's also built into our system. Not like our governmental systems, but ourselves, that we are capable of making the world better, more verdant, more diverse, and that's what allows me to sleep, I think.
Well, good. On that note, I think we'll all be able to sleep a little bit better tonight. Craig, this was such an informative chat. And I mean, I learned so much from you. And your book, Atlas of a Lost World Travels in Ice Age America, is available now anywhere you can buy books. It's in paperback. And of course, this is not by any stretch your first book. You've written, let me see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven previous books. So I highly recommend, if you guys haven't read any of Craig's work, to check it out wherever you buy your books. Craig, thank you so much for joining me today. It's just been an absolute joy.
Well, thanks, Kara. I appreciate you having me here.
Of course. And let us know, are you active at all in social media? I know that you have a website that is really beautiful that you keep up. How can people, stay in touch and learn more about your work?
I have I don't know what a substantial Facebook following is, but I'm there, and I have a lot of people following me. The website, thanks for saying I keep it up. I haven't seen it for I don't know how long. I need to I need to actually I need to get in on that and keep that thing moving. But yeah, the website is a good way to contact me, and I hopefully in the next year I'll get that built up into a more serious and sustained thing. But I use Facebook as a public journal, basically. So I just all adventures as they're happening are going to be up. Last night I was paddleboarding in the moonlight at 10,000 feet. The kids asleep in the tent, and I'll be writing about things like that every day.
Awesome. Yeah, this is great. I'm on your Facebook page right now reading all about everything. So yeah, guys, if you want to see what Craig is up to, check out his Facebook page. And again, check out the book Atlas of a Lost World Travels in Ice Age America. Craig, thank you so much for joining me. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.